is Rachel, and today I'm gonna help you play Wordle. So I'm sure, like me, many of you have been playing Wordle, and it's very addictive. So I decided to make a video with some of my favorite books with 5-letter words in the title to give you some help figuring out some of your 5-letter words for your Wordle game. We're gonna up your game today. So this list is only gonna consist of books that I really think don't get enough love here on BookTube. So some of the more popular ones I had taken out, such as Truly Devious, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, Ember in the Ashes, things like that that really get a lot of hype already. I'm not going to be discussing today, but that does not mean that I don't love them. But I just wanted to take this chance today to highlight some books that I don't hear a lot about, but I think everybody should be reading. So all of these titles will include a 5-letter word in the title, and they're all books I think you should read and that I don't hear enough about. So with that very redundant intro, let's go ahead and jump into the book. So they're in no particular order, but I did try to group a few of them together specifically because they went together. So let's just start with the first one that I have pulled up, and that is I Love You More Than My Phone. This is by Dante Fabiro, and I absolutely love Slothilda. She is the cutest thing. She's so relatable. She's got an adorable dog named Peanut, and I will always buy these collections. There was one before this, and I just love them. They're so stinking cute. I even have the little stickers to go on my phone. So if you're a big fan of Sarah Scribbles, I think you will really love Slothilda. And if nothing else, you're just going to have this amazing cuteness to look at. So highly recommend. I don't think I've ever seen anybody on BookTube talk about Slothilda, so definitely go give her some love. Next up is One for the Money by Janet EVANOVICH. I feel like a lot of BookTube books focus on the super popular ones now, like current trends, and a lot of YA books. So things like this, these kind of gems from like the 80s and 90s just don't slip through very often. So I thought I'd give it a mention. If you are into like cozy murder mysteries and romance, this would be perfect for you. Again, it's called One for the Money. This is the first book in the Stephanie Plum series by Janet EVANOVICH, and there are a ton of these. She's still writing these today. She's up to like something in the 20s, like 28 maybe. And these all started though in the 90s. So it's very like retro-y. I think she's got a pager in like the first several books. I mean, it's just all the 90s that you could take. And essentially we have our main character, Stephanie Plum, who has just recently lost her job. And she kind of bullies her cousin to let her become a bounty hunter for his agency. And it is just, it's funny. There's a lot of romance. It's just really lighthearted and fun to read. I usually take one of these with me on vacation because it's like the perfect book to read on the beach. It's just light, fluffy fun. You can pick it up, you can put it down, and it's just, the characters are just so much fun to meet every time. So highly recommend One for the Money. Next up is in the complete opposite direction, and that is Speak by Laurie Hall Sanderson. I do think that this gets some hype, but not enough. This book is amazing. This is a book I recommend all the time. It is very dark, though, so you need to know that going in. It deals with sexual assault, mental health struggles, all of the abuse trigger warnings. It follows our main character who has been assaulted by a student in her school, and she has basically become a voluntary mute. She just cannot talk about this. It's all like bottled up inside, and she ends up kind of working through her grief along the storyline, especially through her art class where she's drawing these trees, and that's why there's a tree on the cover. And I just can't do it justice speaking about it. You're gonna have to read Speak by Laurie Hall Sanderson. It is fantastic, but again, all the trigger warnings for like abuse, sexual assault, things like that. So be wary if that triggers you. Next up is Spook, Science Tackles the Afterlife by Mary Roach. I recently read this one and I absolutely loved it. It is basically following Mary Roach's journey to try to prove that there's an afterlife. And she visits all these people who are working on this around the globe, and it is just fascinating. Every chapter or every essay, I guess you could call it, is focusing on a different way that someone around the world is trying to prove that there's an afterlife. There's some scientific studies. There's more There's some more anecdotal experiences. There's everything, and it was absolutely fascinating. So I'd highly recommend Spook by Mary Roach. Next up is A Lunch Lady and the Cyborg Substitute. This is the first book in the Lunch Lady graphic novel series by Jarrett J. Krasoska, and I love The Lunch Lady. Basically, she is a superhero lunch lady who, by day and in her normal persona, is just a lunch lady, but whenever there is trouble around, she turns into the superhero lunch lady, and all of her gadgets deal with food and like school lunch type items, and oh my gosh, it's just so funny. I love the series, my students love the series, and it's just absolutely fantastic. It did end with 10, and I thought that was way too soon. I would have loved more Lunch Lady, so definitely check out that series. Next up is Brain on Fire, My Month of Madness by Susanna Callahan, and this is probably one of the most terrifying books I've ever read. Essentially, she gets some sort of an infection on her brain. I can't remember all the details, and I mean, it literally puts her in the hospital in like a mental health watch because she is, struggling just to mentally function. After the infection is finally treated, she has to relearn how to read and like write. It's absolutely terrifying because it feels like it could happen to anybody, but it's just so random, and I know it's very unlikely, but it's still absolutely terrifying. Highly recommend it. It was captivating. It made me really think. It made me really, I don't know, just have all of the feelings of fear and like sympathy and just everything, and oh my gosh, it was so, so good. And that's Brain on Fire, My Month of Madness by Susanna Callahan. Next up is Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. This is another really dark one. This features a woman who has been convicted of murder, and now she is sent to live with this family while she's awaiting her execution. And she's supposed to help them on their farm, and they get to know her a little bit more. Obviously, they're not super excited about her coming to live with them, but they can use the help, so they have a very distinct feeling about her when she arrives, but I think that very much gets muddled as they get to know her, and this follows all the way through to her execution date, and it is dark and just heart-wrenching, but it's amazing. The atmosphere in this Icelandic area is just gorgeous. I really enjoyed listening to the audiobook for this one because of all the Icelandic words. It was just really engrossing. I really, really, really enjoyed this book, and the cover is beautiful. Next up is a graphic novel that I push on everyone if I can, and it's called Brief Histories of Everyday Objects by Andy Warner, and this book is fantastic. It's like little graphic novel vignettes. They're like 2 to 3 pages, and each one of them tells the history of an everyday object we use. For instance, there's a toothbrush on the cover, so they explain in 2 to 3 pages of a graphic novel format how the toothbrush came to be. I learned so much from this, and I actually ended up buying it so I can reread it because you can't remember everything your first read through. So I'm hoping to reread it again soon, but I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. This would be a great book if you are not into graphic novels and you think you want to try. This was one of the first ones I read and really enjoyed because I'm not huge with the graphic novels, but I really enjoyed this one, and the graphic novel nature added a little something to it, I think. And that's Brief Histories of Everyday Objects by Andy Warner. Next up is To Stay Alive, Marianne Graves and the Tragic Journey of the Donner Party by Skeela Brown. Obviously, this is going to be very dark as well if you know anything about the Donner Party. Essentially, this took place in 1846. This follows the journey of the entire Donner Party as they travel from their home in the Midwest all the way out to California on the Oregon Trail. And again, if you know anything about the Donner Party, it did not go well for them. They get stuck in the mountains in the snow, and they have no food, and dark things happen. This is written in verse, so somehow it's even more haunting. And specifically, we follow Mary Ann Graves, a girl on this journey, and it is harrowing. I mean, it's haunting, but it's lyrical, and it's very, very fascinating. So I would highly, highly recommend To Stay Alive by Skeela Brown. Next one is another dark one. I feel like I've got a lot of dark ones today. Maybe that's just me. But anyway, maybe I just read a lot of dark books, I guess. I don't know. But this one is very dark, so all of the trigger warnings. So please check this out. Look up trigger warnings before you read it. if you have any sensitivities. This one's called The Blood of Emmett Till by Timothy B. Tyson. This is a nonfiction account of the lynching of Emmett Till. This happened in 1955, and ooh, even talking about it just gives me the chills. This is one of the most horrific books I have ever read. It follows a young man, I think he was 14 or 15, and allegedly he winked or somehow flirted with a white woman, and he ended up being tortured to death by white men in the town. And it's like I said, all of the trigger warnings, but I think these stories are important to share, especially for people who did not live in that era and have not experienced something like this themselves. Like I said, just all the emotions, all the trigger warnings. If you have not heard of Emmett Till, I highly suggest that you pick up this book. If you have heard of Emmett Till and you haven't read this one, if you're interested in reading more, definitely read it. But it's called The Blood of Emmett Till by Timothy B. Tyson. Next up is much lighter, and that is Everybody Yoga. Let Go of Fear, Get on the Mat, and Love Your Body by Jesmyn Stanley. I love her. She's fantastic. She has so much content on Instagram about body positivity and yoga, and I really, really liked this book because it did feel very accessible. I feel like I am not very athletic. I'm not super bendy and twisty like I see all these, you know, real elaborate yoga poses being, and I think her idea of your own yoga practice is a lot more palatable. It seems like something you can do when you approach it from this angle. So if you're interested in starting yoga but you're very hesitant, I would highly recommend this book, but it would be great for everybody, and that's Everybody Yoga by Jesmyn Stanley. Next up is House of Furies. This is the first book in the House of Furies series by Madeline Rowe, and this is a historical horror, I guess you would call it. Our main character is kind of down on her luck. She's out seeking a job because she has nothing, basically. No food, no opportunities, no job, no money. So she ends up taking an assignment from a woman who offers her a job at a boarding house. So she goes to be a maid, and she's working there, and just strange things keep happening. The owner of the house, Mr. Morningside, is very suspicious, very odd, and some things start happening to the guests, and she becomes more curious, and by the end, you do figure out a little bit of what's happening. Now, sadly, I have not read the rest of the series yet, but I really would love to. I will say, I really like this title that I have on the screen here, but they did redo all the covers to kind of match, and they're probably a little bit more enticing to today's market, but I like all of them, so I would highly recommend House of Furies by Madeline Rowe. Next up is a picture book, and I can tell you, I probably cry about every other time I read this. It's just all of the feels, all of them. It's called After the Fall, How Humpty Dumpty Got Back Up Again by Dan Santat. Dan Santat is probably one of my favorite children's creators. He is an author and an illustrator, and he shows up just all throughout children's literature, such as this case where he wrote and illustrated this book. He also shows up as an illustrator on a lot of other works. He works a lot with Min Lee, and all of those books turn out well, and it's just so, so good. This book has got to be one of my favorite picture books ever, but like I said, it makes me cry about every other time. This picks up at the end of the nursery rhyme of Humpty Dumpty. He's fallen off the wall, and now he has a lot of anxiety around high places, and it really starts to narrow his opportunities in life. That fear is really holding him back, and the worry, and he kind of perseveres, and at the end, oh my gosh, I'm not even going to tell you, I just got chills. The kids always gasp at the end. This story is amazing, and I think what makes it even more sad, the reason that I cry is because Dan has explained that he wrote this for his wife who does suffer with anxiety, and oh my gosh, I literally have chills all over. Like I said, I do full-on cry about half the time. This is probably the most touching, emotional picture book I've ever read in my whole life. I highly recommend you get this, even as an adult, but especially if you have kids. This book is amazing. And that's After the Fall by Dan Santat. Next up is Dread Nation by Justina Ireland. This is a historical horror thriller. We have basically our characters starting in the middle of the Civil War. However, soldiers from the Civil War are starting to rise up as the undead. So basically they put a cease on the Civil War, but they don't really end slavery. They basically send the black people to re-education schools that will basically make them useful in fighting all these zombies. So just a different form of enslavement, essentially. And our main character goes to one of these more prestigious schools. She's going to specifically be helping white women. So somebody's going to purchase her services to protect like their daughter from both regular alive men and from all of these zombies. So our main character is basically a badass. She can like kill everybody, but she can also follow all of society's rules. She's like the whole package. And we follow her from the school to her first assignment, and then things go haywire. So we're following her through her progress through this very, very treacherous time. And this story was amazing. I don't think I really like zombie books, but I loved this book. We read it for book club and everybody really liked it. It was fascinating. The second book, and what I'm assuming is just going to be a duology, is out, and it was even more like shocking. Like I literally gasped multiple times while reading the sequel, but I really, really like this. I recommend it to anybody who doesn't know what kind of genre they want to read, because it feels like it crosses a lot of them. So I highly recommend Dread Nation by Justina Ireland. Next up is Front Desk. I absolutely wanted to include this book in this list because this is one that's been getting challenged a lot lately in all of these ridiculous book banning things that these crazy people are doing. So I highly recommend you read this one, if nothing else on this list, to help support people who are being banned for hateful reasons. This is Front Desk by Kelly Young, and this follows a young girl, and I absolutely love this cover, but it does, I think, make it seem maybe a little younger than what it is. I think she's like 10 or 11, but I absolutely love this book. I love the cover. I think this gives people a chance to see firsthand experience of being an immigrant. We hear, I feel like, a lot of stories of people who live in other countries and a lot of people who live here that are born American. I don't feel like we get a lot of immigrant stories, especially in middle grade. So I think this one really meets this really great need for in middle grade book. So we're following this young immigrant who moves to California, and her parents start a hotel. And oftentimes she's helping at the front desk. And I mean, it really is kind of just like a slice of life for this girl. There's not a huge plot. There's a lot going on, but it's not like there's one big problem that we lead up to. It's kind of all the little problems that they face as immigrants in this town. But we see a lot of things that would be very typical to immigrants and very typical to 10, 12-year-olds. There are some racist issues in this, so just trigger warning, but I would highly recommend that you pick this up and read about our main character, Mia Tang. This book is really pretty cover and also a really, really good, important story. Again, that's Front Desk by Kelly Yang. Next up is Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. She also wrote the Bear and the Nightingale series, so if you've read that, you're familiar with this author. This is the first book in the Small Spaces series. The fourth one and the final one is going to be coming out later this year in 2022, so that's exciting. But this first installation is called Small Spaces. That's also the name of the series, and this takes place across all 4 seasons. So this book takes place in the fall, and then they take place in all the rest of the series. The last one is going to be summer. But anyway, we're following our main character who goes on a field trip, and things go haywire. They end up running for their lives from this scary creature and all of these spooky scarecrows, as you can see in the cover, and she ends up getting a lot of messages from this watch that she wears that her mother used to wear. She's kind of still in a very intense grieving period from losing her mom, and it seems like her mom is sending her messages to keep her safe. So 2 other students end up following her lead, and they all become friends, and that's who we follow throughout the series. So I absolutely would recommend this. This is pretty terrifying for a middle grade series, a middle grade scary, spooky horror series, and I have really loved every edition. I think it's really fascinating. I think it really hits home the ideas of friendship and grief and a lot of important a lot of important things to kids in real life, but also while scaring you to death. So that's really a good combination, and that's Small Spaces by Katherine Arden. Next up is another picture book that I would be remiss if I did not include in this list, because it is one of my absolute favorites. It's a hoot. It's super silly. It's like what every children's book should be, and that's called Potato Pants by Katherine Arden. This follows a potato who really wants to get some pants made for potatoes, and he runs into this eggplant who becomes his nemesis, and he ends up having to just try to find different ways to get these pants, but nobody's helping, so he has to go back to the store to get these potato pants, and again, the relationship, the conflict with the eggplant just keeps escalating until we have a very fun ending, and oh my gosh, I just love this book. It's so stinking cute. It really captivates all the kids' attention because they are very creative minded, and they don't even question why a potato would be buying pants, which I love that about kids. But this book is so fun. I would highly recommend it, especially if you have kids, and that's called Potato Pants by Lori Keller. Next up is one that I talk about all the time on my channel. I don't hear a ton of people talking about it though, so I'm going to keep talking about it, and that is In the Hall with the Knife, the first book in the Clue mystery series by Diana Peterfreund. And this is probably just what you'd think. It's a YA thriller based on the board game Clue, so we have all of our characters with very colorful names, and they all end up kind of trapped in this house when a murder occurs, and they have to figure out who did it. It's just so delightful and fun. This is exactly what I want from a YA murder mystery. I will say this is my favorite book in the series, but there are 3 total in the series, and the series is all complete now. So definitely give In the Hall with a Knife a chance by Diana Peterfreund. Next up is You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. This was a recent book club pick for my high school group. We haven't talked about it yet, but I think they're all really going to like it. I liked that while we did face typical teen problems, typical real life problems, it wasn't all rainbows and butterflies. It overall seemed very light and fun. It wasn't super dark. It wasn't insanely dramatic when our main character, Liz, falls in love with a girl. It wasn't, you know, the end of the world when all of these things happen. She's grieving for her mother. She's got all these issues as well. She's trying to get money for school. She's falling in love with this girl. There's a lot of drama and a lot of problems, but it works out. You know what I mean? It gives you hope. I think it makes it realistically hopeful, if that makes sense. So I highly recommend You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. Next up is another very bleak one. I guess that's what I do. It's Kent State 4 Dead in Ohio by DERF, BACKDERE. This is a graphic novel interpretation of the Kent State Massacre in 1970. Essentially, there were protests on the Ohio State campus, and the Ohio National Guard ended up opening fire on unarmed kids, shooting many, and killing 4. So a lot of the trigger warnings for this, again, there is violence on the page. I mean, you see all of this because it's a graphic novel. So just be aware going into that for all of the shooting, trigger warnings, school shootings, violence, all of that. Blood, gore, etc. But it is very, very good. I like that we see a well-rounded perspective of how all this went down, how essentially there was a lot that went into this Kent State shooting. It wasn't just the guard showed up and started shooting these kids. There were a lot of decisions made, a lot of things happening that led to this. So it wasn't just one thing that led to this. It was multiple things, a lot of influences all coming together that created this tragic event, and I would highly recommend it. We just recently passed the 50th anniversary for this shooting, so I would highly suggest you read it if you have not heard anything about it. And if you live in Ohio, I'm sure you've heard about it, but this will give you a very interesting viewpoint of the massacre. So that's Kent State 4 Dead in Ohio by DERF, BACKDERE. Next up, much more lighthearted, that's Fangs by Sarah Anderson. I love Sarah Anderson. Her graphic novels and comic books are a hoot, and this one is just insanely cute. I love I love the whole product. Like, the book as a whole is very pretty, but I also really like what's inside. It's essentially a comic that follows a romance between a vampire and a werewolf, and it's just adorable. I really, really, really liked it. If you think you might be interested, read it, because it's everything you wanted and everything that you need. So that's Fangs by Sarah Anderson. Next up is Pride and Premeditation. This is the first book in the Jane Austen murder mystery series by Tirzah Price. This was the first installation, and of course I jumped on this because Pride and Prejudice is my favorite book, and this was probably my favorite retelling I've read because it managed to stay very close to the original source material. Essentially, we're following all of the same characters that you know and love from Pride and Prejudice, but just in kind of a different way, a different plot line, if you will. So we actually have had a death occur from one of our characters, and Mr. Bingley is the one that has been suspected of this murder, and our main character Lizzie really wants to be a lawyer, but women aren't really allowed to be lawyers there, but her dad kind of lets her dabble, and her nemesis, Mr. Darcy, is also the son of a lawyer, but he is a lot more welcomed in the community, being a man, and of course conflict ensues, and I love it. I love it. It was so, so good. I mean, obviously the original is going to be better than any copy, but again, this has been my favorite retelling ever. So I highly, highly recommend you pick up Pride and Premeditation. And the second book in the series is getting ready to come out, and I believe that is a retelling of Sense and Sensibility. It's called Sense and Second Degree Murder. And the third one has been announced. It's going to be, I think, Manslaughter Park, maybe? So definitely keep an eye out for those. They sound all amazing. And Pride and Prejudice, definitely you should read. Next up is Arsenic and Adobo, the first book in the Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series by Mia P. Menensala. The second book just came out, Homicide in Hollow Hollow, very recently. I think it was just this past Tuesday, so I'm super excited to get my hands on that one and give it a read, but this series is adorable. If you like murder mysteries or cozy mysteries, you need to pick this one up. This follows our main character, Lila, who's just had a really horrible breakup, and this horrible food critic shows up with her ex-boyfriend, and they both end up getting poisoned from the restaurant that Lila's family owns. So obviously everybody thinks that they did it, but she's got to work hard to prove that they didn't so they can keep the restaurant open. And it's just, I love her whole family. They just are all so adorable. I really, really enjoyed the characters in this book, and I cannot wait to see them in the second book. So definitely give this one a read. It's Arsenic and Adobo, Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery #1 by Mia P. Menensala. And that one has so many Filipino references with food and everything. I would highly recommend the audiobook so that you can hear all of the words spoken correctly. Next up is a book of poems called What Kind of Woman by Kate Baer. I really, really have been enjoying Kate Baer's poetry, which says a lot since I don't really like poetry. So I would definitely give her a follow on Instagram so you can see what she's about if you're hesitant, but pick this one up. It's very short. It's just a small little collection of poetry, so you can sit down and read it in one sitting if you want, or you could read a poem a day, but I recommend this, especially if you are a woman. If you love a woman, read this. Give it a go. It's so good. I love her voice. And her second book of poetry just came out, which was actually even better than this one somehow, and that's called I Hope This Finds You Well, and it was amazing. So keep those in mind. Next up is another cozy mystery that you need to get started on. The third book, I think, either just came out or is just getting ready to come out, and the first one is called A Deadly Inside Scoop. It's the Ice Cream Parlor mystery series by Abby Collette. This is just a super fun, cozy mystery. We have our main character who is moving back to the Cuyahoga Falls area after quitting her, very intense city job, and she wants to open a ice cream parlor because that's kind of been a thing in her family, so she's decided to take it over, reopen it, and kind of revitalize this family business. But literally the day before it opens, she stumbles on a dead body, and then, all the cozy drama ensues. But it's fantastic. I love the ice cream setting. It was very fun. Every time I read these, it makes me want to get ice cream, so keep that in mind. But there are 3 books out or just about out now in the series, so it'd be a great time to jump in. Next up are 2 that kind of go together. The first one is called Brilliant Maps for Curious Minds, 100 New Ways to See the World, and the other one, the second one, is called North American Maps for the Curious Mind, 100 New Ways to See the Continent. These are both by Ian Wright with some help from some other people, I believe, on both of those. Both of these are just really kind of quick read books where it's very heavy on the infographics. You basically, on every page, see infographics of either North America or the world, depending on which book you pick up, that just tell you the weirdest information. A lot of them are politically inclined, but there's some that would be like, I can't remember exactly, but it would be like favorite taco type toppings. I mean, it's just random stuff, but then some of them are a little bit more serious, but it's all fun just to see what happens around the world. So I would highly recommend flipping through these. They're very, very, very interesting. Next up is Born a Crime, Stories from a South African Childhood by Trevor Noah. I would highly recommend the audiobook for this, but essentially we're following Trevor through his childhood in South Africa. And it's really wild to read about this because not having lived in South Africa, apartheid seems like it was forever ago. It seems like that should have been a very, very long time ago that just some of the old people remember, but Noah actually grew up during apartheid. So that's wild to hear the repercussions of that from somebody who is roughly my own age. It's just very jarring. So I think that's why it's also important, because if you're anything like me, you just had no idea how recent that was. So I think you learn a lot, but you also get a lot of really great perspective, and it's just fun. Trevor Noah is a comic, so this is going to be a fun read. But I highly recommend the audio, and again, that's Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. Next up is The Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America by Erik Larson. Erik Larson was one of my mom's favorite authors, so she really wanted me to read at least one of them, so I picked this one because it deals with the Chicago's World Fair, and obviously there was a serial killer roaming around that was grabbing people and murdering them. This one deals with H.H. Holmes and his creepy little house and all the buildings in the Chicago's World Fair. So I feel like, I don't think this book is going to be for everyone, but if you're in the niche area that would be interested in this book, it's going to be exactly for you. I really enjoyed the discussion of all the architecture that went into the Chicago World's Fair, because I recall sitting in lectures in college about all these buildings. And for some reason it didn't click then, but as they're describing these, like, it just felt like all of my knowledge was like shuffling together and connecting in just the right way. So I very much enjoyed that, but if you are not into architecture, that part might seem a little bit dense. And all of his writing is, you need to know that going in. This is not something you're going to sit down and read like in a couple hours. This is like work to read this one, but it's really rewarding because you get all of this information, all of these stories. You're learning about architecture, all the things that went into the Chicago World's Fair, along with the environment that allowed America's first serial killer to kill a lot of people. So it's very fascinating, but it is going to be a little bit more work than, say, a cozy mystery. So just know that going into it. But I would highly recommend The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. Next up is another one that's kind of a throwback. I think these started in the early 80s. This is a series by Sue Grafton that I usually call the Alphabet series, but I believe the actual name is the Kinsey Malone series, and the first book is called A is for Alibi, and then all of the letters of the alphabet get a highlight except for Z. She got all the way to Y before she sadly passed away, so we will not get a Z, but it does end with Y. So all the books are out now. You can marathon all of them, but the first one is called A is for Alibi. And I don't even remember exactly what this first specific one was, but it follows our main character, Kinsey Malone, as she investigates things. She used to be a police officer, but now she's a private investigator, and she actually like rents a little room from this old man, and oh my god, he is adorable. I love the old guy, and it's just fun to go through. These are kind of like cozy mysteries. There's not a lot of hardcore police work involved, but she used to be a police officer, so you do see that some. But anyway, it's very enjoyable. Like I said, it takes place originally in the 80s, and then obviously she just finished writing them a couple years ago. I think her last one came out maybe a year before she died, so they're fairly recent towards the end. But when you start with A and B and C, they're going to be straight out of the 80s. But that's a lot of fun. So definitely check out Sue Grafton's Kinsey Malone series. The first book is A is for Alibi. And then luckily enough, one of my favorite writers, Phoebe Robinson, all 3 of her books have a 5-letter word in the title, so I get to talk about all of them. So we're going to do it really quickly, but basically go read Phoebe Robinson. That's what you need to take away from the next few minutes. So the first one is called You Can't Touch My Hair, and other things I still have to explain. The next one is Everything's Trash, but It's Okay. And the last one, the most recent one, is Please Don't Sit on My Bed in Your Outside Clothes. All of them are essay collections. All of them are fantastic. I believe I gave all of them 5 stars. The first one focuses more on hair, race, gender, things like that. But hair is a kind of reoccurring theme in that first one. That was very interesting. But all of her books contain comedy and pop culture because she is a comic and she's very into pop culture. And you just got to get into it and enjoy, figure out her tone, and then you're going to love them. I can see that her tone might not be for everybody, but if it is for you, you're going to love her. The second one, Everything's Trash, but It's Okay, really focused on some of the politics going on. It seemed like there for a while, politically, things were just really kind of trash. And she's talking kind of about, I feel like the theme was like finding joy through the weird things and some of the negative things going on. And then our last one, Please Don't Sit on My Bed in Your Outside Clothes. I would say just the theme was kind of taking control of your life, you know, and we hear a lot about her new boyfriend. Well, I guess he's not that new anymore, but he's referred to as British Bake Off, because he is British. But anyway, you hear a lot about their life together during quarantine, and basically what I'm telling you is you can't go wrong if you pick up any of these. They're all fantastic. I love her voice. I love her writing. I think it's hilarious. And yeah, definitely pick one of these 3 and go read it. That is your assignment. So that was a lot of recommendations. I didn't realize I had that many. So thank you so much if you've watched to the end. Thumbs up, y'all. But anyway, I hope this is helped you with your Wordle game. We've seen a lot of 5-letter words that you can use in your game. Also, I hope you found some books that you can take away from this. So if you did find one that you want to read, I would love to hear about it in the comments. If you have any books with 5-letter words in the title down below, list them for us. We'd love to see them. And yeah, let's talk books in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again in another video soon. Bye for now.